You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative, and here to help me talk about the assembled Avengers is John Mills.
Indeed I am. Or am I, in fact, a shadow of myself impersonated by Loki? That's a big question.
I don't know. All I know is, man.
Wait, we just passed through a pillar. Now I'm somebody else.
This costume, I mean, I feel the righteousness.
How can you squeeze in as many cameos as possible in 30 seconds? Thor: The Dark World will show you how.
It's absolutely true. And I guess not to spoil it for anyone, but the cameo with Chris Evans is hysterical. So
Yes, it is.
I mean,
yes, it is.
That's well done humor right there. So absolutely. Anyway, of course, tonight or tomorrow or today, whenever you're listening to this, we are going to be talking about Thor: The Dark World, as we are firmly entrenched now in Phase 2 of the MCU. Of course, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're in the same feed as the 602 Club, so we'd appreciate you subscribing to that. And, of course, making sure as well, if you're on Apple Podcasts, giving us a star rating review there. It definitely helps people find the show. And, we'd love for you to follow us over on Twitter at the 602 Club or on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. We're also on Letterboxd. If you don't know that, we're over there on Letterboxd under the 602 Club, so you can follow us there. We've even got lists going of, different things like Snyder Cuts or Assembling Avengers you can follow and see things there. And, of course, just about every film that we've covered, and in fact, every film we have covered is on Letterboxd. And so you can also check us out, the entire network, over on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. We've got the listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference you can join, and that allows you to talk to listeners from all over the world about the shows that we have going on the network. And, of course, you can find us online at trek.fm. And if you like the show and you like the network, we would appreciate if you go over to Patreon and support us there so we can make sure all of this quality content keeps coming to you, and that's at patreon.com/TrekFM. So, John, like many of the Marvel movies, honestly, there is some interesting backstory with this one, and part of that has to do with the fact that they actually hired Patty Jenkins, who went on as many people know, to direct Wonder Woman. She was actually hired here first to direct Thor: The Dark World, and I wanted to ask you about that because one of the things that she wanted to do with the story was kind of give this a more Romeo and Juliet feel. She really actually wanted Thor to be, banned from going to Earth to rescue her. She wanted this whole story about the Dark Elves hiding the ether on Earth because Odin doesn't actually care about Earth, which I thought was also very interesting as a story plot point. And so, when you know what she obviously did with Wonder Woman, and obviously, kind of knowing what she's capable of as a director, obviously we're talking in hindsight. So how do you feel about, Patty Jenkins not getting the opportunity and even just thinking about her ideas? What do you think of those?
Well, I mean, like you said, you never know. I think that she is a really good director. I think that it's fair to reference Wonder Woman and say, well, gosh, look at Wonder Woman and look what she did with that story and how great it was. But then, to be fair, you can then look at Wonder Woman 1984 and say, well, that one was less successful in how it was put together and everything and its reception. And I think that, and I know I beat this drum constantly, but I think it all starts with the script. And obviously her ideas are more focused, it sounds like. Basically everything tied more together, and having a more Romeo and Juliet feel would have put the focus on the relationship between Hemsworth and Portman, which quite possibly could have really benefited this movie and given it a little bit more heart and something a little bit more resonant and accessible, instead of, I don't want to tip my hand, instead of just basically dissembling into a collection of, story by bullet point again,
right?
Which is a trap that Marvel falls into more than once already as we're going through. I mean, I know that you being a bigger DC fan, especially by this point in the timeline, I'm guessing you probably would have. There's probably some alternate timeline where you really wish she had directed this. But would she have gotten Wonder Woman if she'd done this?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know if that's the case. And so, I would obviously take her getting Wonder Woman, over doing this film for sure, just because I think her Wonder Woman is fantastic, and again, this has nothing to do with Wonder Woman 84 and my feelings on that. Wonder Woman is a fantastic comic book film, I think. And
yeah,
I think she brought, everything you wanted to that, a real gravitas to it, a lot of fun to it. And so, when I hear her ideas, I do think one of the things you mentioned, and I think it's right on target in the sense that the script there sounds like it has slightly more cohesion. I don't think rewatching this film was just an interesting thing for me, because I have not seen this film in legitimate years. Like, I think I saw this in the theater and that was it, and so it's been a really long time, and I've had one opinion of it. So kind of coming back to it, especially in quick succession with the rest of the films that we've been talking about, was fascinating. But I do think that, if there's anything I could ding this for in the film-wise, is that it doesn't feel as cohesive story-wise as it should. And part of that, I think, has to do with the fact that they're trying to do a lot relationally with Thor and the different relationships in his life, like with Jane, like with his brother, like with his parents. And some of it, I think, works better than the first film, and some of it, I think, maybe doesn't work quite as well as that first film with Thor. So I think her idea sounds good. Obviously, again, it all comes down to execution. And so I want to ask you then, so we bring in Alan Taylor, who's known for doing things like Game of Thrones and Mad Men, things like that. Obviously, Game of Thrones is probably really what gets him this job, because, Game of Thrones is basically like doing a film every week as you direct an episode. And their goal here was to kind of make a slightly more grounded feel to Asgard, give it a little bit more of the Viking feel, not feel as, not that it's not fantastical, but just make it feel more real. Like, I think that's really and so I wanted to ask you if you felt like, does that come across to you at all in this movie? Does Taylor get that across in a way that maybe Brana didn't?
No. I think that this movie is, quote unquote, darker. This movie, the direction to be, quote unquote, more real feels just like when they became obsessed, and the amorphous they, but just like when studios became obsessed with things need to be dark and gritty now. And so there's this veneer over it, and I don't think that it naturally belongs with this character. If I'm honest, the tone is better in the first one because it's lighter. It's not taking itself too seriously, and this comes across as something that's taking itself too seriously. It's become, I think, obsessed at this point with that idea of, oh, we're going to make these real people, but then how real can you make it is the ultimate question. We're in the Marvel universe. We've already altered human history as we understand it. So I would have rather they embrace that. Now, keep in mind, last week we talked about Iron Man 3, but Iron Man 3 still had that over-the-top spectacle, but we're talking about focusing on Thor's relationships and Thor working on himself. That's the same directive that Iron Man 3 has, and it's a completely different result. And it's, again, I go back to the script, a focused story about something more than events, about an internal journey for a character.
That's fascinating to me. And I'm going to completely disagree with you. I think that this movie is much more successful by making Asgard feel like a more real place. And just, tactilely, it feels more real in many places. Okay.
So
hold on.
Yeah.
Which I get and I really like. And I think that tactile nature helps me connect more with the world of Asgard as a real place than making it, because the first movie felt so much like just a green screen CGI place. This having a more tactile place, I was more connected to Asgard and kind of cared more about it as a place than the first movie. And so I think that's where I think the goal of making it feel more grounded really worked for me here, where it doesn't work in the first movie.
See, okay, I think we're talking about two sides of the same coin, sort of thing. I agree. The sets and the effects, by and large, this does feel like a more substantial place to be. This feels like something that could exist. Yes, give you that. But the stuff underpinning that gives it the real sense of reality is what's missing for me. And it's because it takes itself so seriously. And as a result, I can understand, I know your complaints with the first one, and I get that. I acknowledge, but I guess then my counterpoint would be, I suppose what I am sensing is an overcompensation. They instead of altering course slightly, it feels like they're trying to do a 180, and it just doesn't work. Instead, they just spin in a circle.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I think I understand why it doesn't work for you. I think it just works for me better than it does for you here.
Sure.
And so therefore this movie, because of that, becomes a lot more successful than the first Thor movie. For me, in that too, I also, one of the focuses here, and I think you rightly pinpointed the fact that, Iron Man 3, it's this journey for Tony, and they're actually trying to, I think, get right what they didn't in the second film. I think here they're also trying to connect you more with the character of Thor, and make him a more real, vibrant, like three-dimensional character. And I think they're much more successful than they were in the first film. And I think part of that was actually watching him interact with his father in a way where he's actually learned some things that make him a better king material now than even Odin. Like, he's surpassed his father in the ability to be a king that Asgard actually needs, which I was really surprised by, because I didn't remember this film having anything about the character of Thor. I just remembered him being boring again. But this, I felt like there was more weight to his story. There was more weight to his decision making, and I felt like there was more weight to his kind of his experience in Avengers and the first movie seems to have really impacted who the character is now. And to me, I appreciated that. Like, if there's anything about this film that I liked more and I thought was better than I remembered and impacted my thought process on this film, was that this movie is actually about Thor. And I appreciated that. And it's about his relationship with his parents. It's about his relationship with Jane. It's about his relationship with Loki. But it's also about his relationship with himself and what he's learned. And so if there's anything I respond better to, it is that. And I think it's, in that way, much more successful. Now, I'm not speaking as the film as a whole, but that part, I think, is much better for me.
It doesn't work particularly well for me because I think that they wind up. I acknowledge those things, and I know what they're trying to do, and I know the direction they've pointed him in, and it's a good direction. I acknowledge that, but I think that they rob a lot of his charm in this movie. He might have been, a ditzy Mimbo in the first one. But in this one, I want a little bit more of that Mimbo back. I want a little bit more of the fun that was there. Like they dampened the flame too much with Hemsworth here.
Well, I guess you'll be ready then for
okay. See, now see, but see that's the point I'm trying to get at, is that not to tip too far here.
No, I know.
I think all three Thor movies are story, basically a study in overcompensation, where you have the first one, which I plug into because it's like, it's fun, it's sort of campy, it's bright, and it's engaging, and I have some charisma and energy there. And then this one, they're like, oh well, we went too far in that one direction, so let's go this way. And I see it as they turned 180, and it's like, okay, you could have just made a right turn and not tried to turn completely around. And then they wind up turning 180 again, and then creating a whirlpool in Thor Ragnarok, where you just don't even know what the hell they're doing. And so, not to tip my hand on that one, I look forward to rewatching
I understand what you're saying.
But yeah,
well, I mean, and I think I liked what you said there about the idea of like doing the 180, and for me, I don't think that it. I really see this movie as kind of being, the darker sequel, in the sense that, many middle parts of a trilogy are the darkest part of the trilogy. And so having this kind of more serious tone, I think ended up working for me better. And you know how, I mean, obviously I'm more of a fan of the Snyderverse, so when your movie takes itself a little bit more seriously, and I kind of appreciated that this movie took itself a little bit more seriously, and it took the weight that's on Thor as a character that is straddling two worlds, where he has become connected with the world on Earth, and he is still connected, obviously, with Asgard, and trying to find a way to do what's best for both. But obviously having his heart be pulled towards Earth, I think, was really interesting. Now, again, I'm just speaking specifically about the story for the character of Thor.
Sure.
I'm not necessarily saying that this entire movie works, like gangbusters, but at least for the title character, I really like it a lot more. And for that.
Right. And yes, I acknowledge that is something they're trying to do here. But it definitely gets lost in this. I was actually talking about this, like sorting through my feelings. This is the second time I've seen this. The first time I saw it, no lie, was after Endgame, because this movie had such a terrible reputation right out of the gate.
It does.
People told me, I skipped Iron Man 2 because people were like, it's not that great. This one, people were coming out of the theater saying, stay far away from it. It doesn't matter. Don't go. Just skip it. You'll be fine without it. And I was fine without it. And I think that is the biggest damning comment you can make about the movie, is it was completely unnecessary in a sense, because by this point we're caught up in the Marvel narrative. I need to watch these movies to put the tapestry together. And so that's a massive misfire if you have one of those movies be essentially pointless in your build up to the next movie, since we're paying for TV installments here.
Sure. And I think that's a good point, because one of the questions I want to ask you is that, it's interesting to me that actually, is we learned in the Avengers that we're basically looking towards Thanos and most likely an Infinity Gauntlet story, right? And the Thor movies are the ones that have introduced us to both Infinity Stones. First movie introduced us to the Tesseract, which was there in the armory. And then this movie introduces us to the Ether, which is the next Infinity Stone. So I think it's really interesting that the Thor movies have been the ones to introduce us to these massive things. But in some ways, I think it makes sense because, they're the power out there in the universe. And so, that really surprised me. I totally forgot that, both of the two first Infinity Stones come from the Thor films.
Yeah, it's I just wish that they had picked a direction. I really hate what they did with the dark elves and the dark world in this.
Sure.
It comes across so much. You point out Alan Taylor. Hey, he worked on Game of Thrones. I've only watched the first season of Game of Thrones. I know. Every time I say it, everybody says, what? Only the first season? But yes, that's right. Your ear holes are working. I've only watched the first season because I was bored by the end of it. Maybe I'll go back and try it again in the future. Anyway, basically these dark elves very much play, I guess, the way the White Walkers in Game of Thrones wind up playing out, where it's like it's this enemy that, if the conditions are right, are going to come through and just blah, blah, or whatever. But more importantly, it really feels like a Lord of the Rings ripoff at the beginning of this movie. And that's the moment at which I start disconnecting. Mm-hmm. Because it's, back before. I'm like, I saw this. This is Sauron with the ring. What do I... Okay.
Sure.
Well, you're not even trying to do your own thing at this point.
Yep. And here is where I would 100% agree with you, in the sense that I think one of the major downfalls of this film happens to be the villain and the villains in the Dark Elves. And like you said, it does feel very Lord of the Rings-ish. And this is one of the places where, as we talked about at the beginning, I do think that Patty Jenkins' storyline that she had thought of feels a little bit more cohesive, in the sense that everything kind of flows together better, and it fits, like it connects better than it being like a prologue where then we find out the ether's hidden on Earth, but it's not really for any good reason. It's not like on purpose. It just happens to be really an accident, honestly, because it happened during the convergence, and where they put it just happens to be on, like all of that stuff. It feels more contrived than actually a really well-oiled plot that makes these villains more necessary to the story. Because in the end, it feels like you could put almost any type of villain here, and there's nothing really special about Malekith or the Dark Elves, honestly.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think that this movie works better if they go ahead and they tear the Band-Aid off and they have the discovery of the ether, and then have like a flashback with narration of, you found this thing, here's how it got there. So instead of opening with it, they have it sort of nestled in the middle, where they say, hey, Jane, you drew the short straw, let me tell you what's inside you, so that there's some sort of sense of it being relayed to her, the enormity of what, and the ether. So the ether is the soul stone, but I thought a normal mortal touching the stone would blow you apart. Like, the only reason Star-Lord can hold it is because he's Ego's son. So we have lineage there that works out. That's why he can hold that one stone.
It'll be an interesting thing for us to track, And I think, is it the Soul Stone or is it the Mind Stone?
I don't know you know what? Can I be completely honest with you?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
what the ether is.
Mind Stone. Yeah. Mind Stone, Soul Stone, Halfway Stone, Gallstone, Bladder Stone, Kidney Stone, whatever stone it is. If it's a stone, then Natalie Portman is supposed to be blown apart by it, correct?
That is a great question.
So let me ask you this, because this whole thing about it being a stone, I thought
it's the reality
stone was what was in.
That's what it is.
Okay, it's the reality stone. Okay, whatever, fine. It's a stone. So, yeah, and the Mind Stone. Which stone is in Loki's scepter?
That would be the Space Stone.
So that's Space Stone,
the Tesseract was, yes.
Okay, the Tesseract was the Space Stone. Wasn't there a stone in Loki's scepter when he was controlling Hawkeye?
It's a part of the Space Stone, I believe. So, yeah.
Man, I watched all these movies and I'm still having trouble tracking all of this nonsense. This is nuts. You know what? I'm sure that there is somebody listening to this right now
or the
yelling
Mind
at their
Stone,
speakers.
Like it says, the scepter was a weapon utilized the yellow Mind Stone housed inside a blue computer module. So, I don't know.
Listen, it doesn't matter. My question stands.
Let's just say that it's confusing.
Well, but I mean, again, it's the consistency thing about it. Yeah. Does it destroy somebody or not, sort of thing. And I don't care I honestly don't care whether it's consistent or not. Obviously, it didn't impact my enjoyment of anything.
Sure.
And I think just so long as we're getting back to that and talking about Natalie Portman, I gotta say, man, there is surprisingly zero chemistry between her and Hemsworth in this movie. None whatsoever. The scenes with them play like people who have just read the script for the first time and they just turn the cameras on. There is absolutely no magnetism between them, which proves significantly even more frustrating than the first one, because Sif basically declares her intentions for Thor, and they do have chemistry on screen in the brief moments that happen. And I'm sitting there and Thor, why would you even pay attention to this person? You have nothing. There's no spark here. And I'm not alone in that, right? Do you see anything that makes you believe in love that spans the galaxies?
Okay, so I think you really hit on, the two main issues here are the fact that the storyline with the Dark Elves isn't great, and the storyline with Jane isn't great because Portman and Hemsworth don't have chemistry. And so this whole longing he has for Earth and for Jane, I don't feel it because I don't sense the chemistry between the actors, and therefore, as much as I like what they're doing with the character of Thor himself, it's not to the level it could be. Like, this could be a great movie if the Dark Elves are a more substantial villain and there's chemistry between Jane and Thor. You do those two things, this is a much better story. But because I just don't really care about Jane, because the connection that she has with Hemsworth isn't electric, I need it to be like struck by lightning type of thing, right? Like,
no, hey, there you go.
Yeah. Which, and this is the thing, like with Iron Man, we talked about, we love, Tony and Pepper together. We talked about how much we really appreciated the relationship between Betty and Bruce in Hulk, right? Yeah. We also talked about how much the relationship between, Cap and Agent Carter, it is electric, and we talked about ways we thought that could have been even better, right? Here, 2 movies in, there's just no chemistry between these two characters, and that's what I think makes this movie fall the flattest, because I'm more invested in Thor's family drama, which I think is really good, between his parents and his brother and himself. The struggles of, like, his parents wanting him to marry one person, and that's not what he wants. He wants somebody else. That's all great, but it would have blown people's minds if you actually cared about the fact that, him and Jane might not get to be together. Whereas I am sitting there thinking, dude, bro, why aren't you going for Sif? She's right there, and she's, like, awesome, and you have more, and there's more chemistry there. So it undercuts what they're trying to do with that portion of the story. And this is the thing that makes this such a mixed bag of a film, is the fact that half the film doesn't work the way they need it to.
Well, and I think it also gets back to the idea, if you subtract the dark elves, you find some other vehicle for, like, the ether. The ether is the plot line I care the least about. And it's the one about the fate of the world. And I would have rather they focus on those human drama elements, because it would have been engaging, it would have been interesting, and it would have been emotionally investing with everything. I would have loved a movie that was more like Iron Man 3, that was more focused on that type of journey. And I know that everybody that hated Iron Man 3 is yelling at the speakers of the headphones right now, or whatever. But
they can be wrong. It's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. but the thing is, I think this would have been. It's a good thing I didn't see this in the movie theater, that I waited so long to see it, because now I have the experience of seeing Iron Man 3 and then this right after, and it is a whiplash sort of effect, because it is obvious that they have this impulse, and I think they will continue it with Winter Soldier, to turn the character's gaze inward and self-reflective as they grow and recognize problems with the world around them. Mm-hmm. And I don't get that here. I don't get... Sure. I think the ether part works even less, because I don't feel like anybody there actually cares or feels real. There's no sense of danger or suspense. It's this is just the thing they have to throw up there for blue lights and effects. And I know you'll hate me going down this route, but it's the same problem with the first Suicide Squad movie, where it's like, oh, okay, we got another world-ending device. We know that. No,
sure,
okay,
sure.
Just keep going.
Why
did you fall back on this?
Yeah. I mean, I can't fault you for that at all. I mean, because that is the problem with the Suicide Squad film, and, even the director of that movie wishes that he had just made, the Joker the villain. So, yeah, because of that, I think the other problem here with the ether and the dark elves is that with the ether, we just had a discussion there, and we got lost as to what these stones are, and I think that this is another thing that kind of is frustrating rewatching this so far, because they're not really actually doing a very good job of setting up these stones, in the sense of, like, what is this ether and what does it do? Like, why do the elves want it, other than it will help them make the world, the universe dark again, right? Like, other than that, like, I don't have any inclination that this alters reality. Right. That it does this thing to which is going to be obviously so important in the future, right? And so we're introducing this really important plot point, but I don't really have an understanding as to why it's so important, other than the dark elves want it and it's going to make things dark. Like, okay, like, you see what I'm saying? Like, it's not as good of storytelling as I feel like it needs to be to really make me interested in the thing itself. It's just this MacGuffin that we're chasing, right? And therefore, like the Jane story, it's not it doesn't have the gravitas that it needs to have. And therefore, like I said earlier, it's like we end up in this place where, yes, I'm really enjoying the fact that they're really trying to dig into this Thor character and give me some reason to kind of care about him as a character. But the things that are surrounding it that are kind of supposed to support that, like the villain and the girlfriend, are falling flat, and that's a failing of the film.
Yeah, I go back to what I was saying to the person I was talking about this, this sort of process, seeing it the second time, of just, it's a pork sandwich. It's messy. It's got some flavor that you like. Now, the thing is, I love me a good pork sandwich, so I'm not saying pork sandwiches are a bad thing, but it's not how I would want, it's not how I would want this movie put together. It's got flavors, right. It's got elements, it's got stuff, and it's all slapped together, but it's a big old mess.
Right.
And it just...
Because it ends up being the McRib instead of the pork belly sandwich that's really well crafted,
Now, see, the thing is, you have to go down this road and throw shade at the McRib, which I think is completely uncalled for. And I don't like that. I don't like that you're throwing shade at the McRib, because that's a bridge. That, my friend, is a Bifrost too far.
I said that specifically
Bam,
for our friend Yancey. So, Yancey, if you're listening, that was for you.
How dare you?
I dare you? I'm not a McRib fan, but give me a nice pork belly sandwich, which I've had some really good ones where it's like I would eat that sandwich every day if it was possible. So, but that's the problem, is that this is what you're saying. This is what they're creating. It's like it's something that you throw away and eat when there's nothing else to eat, right? Whereas what you wanted this to be is something that you just want to continue to go back to, kind of like when we were talking about Iron Man 3. So we've been talking about the villain, and I got to ask you this, because they have Chris Eccleston come in here. He played the Doctor in season 9 there. He was the first Doctor back when they kind of rebooted the series. They almost got mad.
Just for anybody like me, he means Doctor Who, which is a show I've never watched outside of when they had old BBC reruns on PBS.
Yes. They almost got Mads Mikkelsen to play the role, but the problem here is that, and I want to ask you this, is that it doesn't matter who they got to play this role, because the makeup is so overbearing on their face that it's not like they have anything to do.
I actually know Christopher Eccleston at a glance, and he doesn't look... I couldn't pick out who was underneath the makeup here. It really didn't matter who they had. Just like you're saying, didn't matter who they had in it, but not just because of the makeup, but his whole role is to walk on screen seriously and say things sometimes in Dark Elvish and then sometimes in English and be bad. Okay. He's a totally inconsequential villain, which is interesting because I think we can both agree that our gold standard villain is Loki from the Avengers, because everybody loved him as the villain. I would argue that Guy Pearce in Iron Man 3 is right up there too, but he's not as much fun as Loki is. So Loki is our gold standard so far, along with Red Skull. We can't forget Red Skull. Red Skull's really fun, but we don't get that. We get, sadly, Malekith is more like, why I can't, Iron Man 2.
He's
Whiplash,
yeah.
Yeah, he's more like Mickey Rourke's character, where it's like, okay, I guess, sure, I'm not afraid of him, and there's some interesting-ish things happening, but sure, I know he's going to lose, so whatever.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Knowing him from Doctor Who and what he's capable of too as a character actor, I think he's completely wasted here. And like you said, and I think we haven't talked about this, but the fact that obviously Loki is back in this film and has such a large role in it, in the sense that we're watching the repercussions of what happened in the Avengers. And I didn't know this, but the character was actually supposed to die in this movie. Like, they were literally going to kill Loki at the end, and test audiences did not believe that Loki was dead. So they changed him dying and gave him this new ending where he's actually ruling Asgard. And so, I mean, really, Loki, again, is the villain in this movie, and he's much better than the actual villain, right?
Yes. Correct. Yeah, completely agree. But I do have to ask, because we've talked about the effects, we've talked about the story, we've talked about the actors. I gotta ask, because this is one of our favorite things to hit on. This is our second Bryan Tyler score. So in terms of score, what do you think of Thor: The Dark World?
It's weird, but Bryan Tyler kills it, I think. I think he takes what Patrick Doyle did and makes it even better. His whole goal here, and is reading about the score, he was saying his goal was to make this as epic as possible, to make it feel as big and bold and I actually really like this score. He utilizes the Thor theme really well here. He gives it like this kind of like gravitas, and like he uses a lot of choral in the movie, which is cool. Having choirs sing, which is something that's really, I think, really adds to and accentuates kind of the otherworldly and quote unquote godly aspect of the character and the score.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bryan Tyler, Iron Man 3 was fantastic. And then with this score, I think he's up there with Silvestri now with creating the best scores in the MCU. And this is actually a score, regardless of whether I rate this movie highly or not when we do our ratings, I'll listen to this score now just to have on like when I'm working and stuff, because it's a great background score that doesn't necessarily need the movie to be enjoyable to listen to. So for me, this might be one of the best parts of the movie, actually.
Oh, it is. It is. And much like the late, great Jerry Goldsmith, I think that Tyler delivers a score that's better than the movie deserves, is the only way I can put it, where paying attention to the music while I'm watching it, I'm thinking to myself, well, at least he showed up. I agree with you. The score, at the very least, is something you can listen to, and you can say, well, that's pretty darn good. I just wish it was attached to a better movie, is just all that I really wish.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can agree with you on that front, in the sense that I think that the score delivers in a way that the movie just doesn't. And it is disappointing, because I really think that, the movie itself, one of the things I do have to give it credit for is the sense that I do feel like that they learned from the first movie, and that they did try to make changes, and I appreciate that, that they took some lessons from the first movie, and where I think the first movie, it was a little too simple of a story. I think that they really wanted to make something that had a little bit more, like, we're actually going to focus on the character that this movie is named after, and we're going to try and make you care about that character and his growth and move him forward and all those things. And so, I think, to me, that's something that I really appreciate. And I mean, I don't know. One of the questions we always ask, was there anything that changed for you here? This is the second time that you've seen it. Honestly, this might only be my second or third time. I can't honestly remember. And so, was there anything good or bad that was, better for you?
Before I get to that, I want to kick over to you. Is this or is this not the first time we get a double stinger?
That is a good question.
We get two stingers here.
Yes, we do.
And the first one has to do with setting up Guardians. And then Thor showing up at the end of the credits so that Jane knows that he still loves her, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is this our first inkling that Marvel's going to start to get a little too self-indulgent with these things? Because I think it is.
Well, and I think it's a good question because, with the double stinger, you called it beforehand in the sense that this is something where they kind of cheat and they don't place this in the movie, but it's important for what's coming up next, right?
Right.
And, obviously if you don't see the fact that they hand this stone off to the Collector, who we'll see in Guardians of the Galaxy, and then, of course, we'll see once Thanos goes on his rampage looking for the stones. I mean, I know people love the stingers, but in all honesty, I feel like there's no reason for this to be a stinger.
I agree.
It easily could have been worked into the film.
And I definitely think it's a happier ending to have Thor show up and give Jane a kiss and say, I haven't forgotten you. I'm not going to be a stranger. And you can still have the Loki ending where he reveals himself as the king and have that be you can have Thor go back and say, listen, I got to go talk to my dad. I'll be back. I love you. Go back up, have the conversation with Odin, have him walk off. Loki reveals himself. It's good to be the king. Movie ends. Everything's self-contained. There's no reliance on a stinger. And you have this sense of the last time we see Thor, he's basically leaving to go back to Jane. What is he going to make it? Is it going to happen? I think there's a real sense of, I think it's just better. Would it have saved the movie? Not this particular one. No, it wouldn't. But I think it speaks to some of the structural stuff that you and I have glommed onto.
Sure.
In terms of anything that changed since the one time I've watched it before this, I think that, and I think we've talked about this with Iron Man 2. Once you experience the bad, the second time it hits you, your reaction is not so strong because you know what to expect. It can't disappoint you again. It can just reinforce that it's not great. I mean, I was left. I think this was true in the first time. They started to do some interesting things with Heimdall, but again, it was just the beginnings of interesting things, and it was, well, that would have been something interesting to pursue and have more of in the movie. And so I just felt like he got shortchanged again, and I could have. So do I have this vitriolic hate of it the way that I used to? No, but it's not because I like it anymore. It's just because I just knew what to expect going into it. What about you? Did anything shift?
I mean, yeah, I feel like that I, in the end, have kind of shared what shifted for me and the fact that I ended up responding better to the storytelling for the character of Thor himself. And this movie actually made me care about the character more. I think the scene that really does it was the scene when they, go to the planet. They have Jane, and him and Loki are trying to draw Malekith to that planet. And they're having the argument. And it's a really good scene between the brothers. Because Loki's trying to do his thing where he excuses his behavior and blames it on everybody else. And Thor won't let him do it. He comes at it and says, no, you know why this happened. You know why our mother died. He won't let Loki excuse his behavior. And I really liked that scene. And I liked what it did for the character of Thor, which is to be somebody who has started to take responsibility for his own actions, who's become a person who, instead of like the first movie, was the playboy. He's learned the lesson, and so that scene alone really made me appreciate this character in a way that I haven't before.
It's a good scene.
Yeah. And so, and this is actually the scene that I think makes me feel the journey that Thor will go on in Infinity War. Which it's going to come, and but, that, strangely enough, that was one of the stories that I actually gravitated towards in Infinity War, because I felt like they continued this thread of Thor kind of having the weight of the universe on his shoulders, and it being heavy. And I appreciate, anyway, so that, for me, that's what changed, that I actually have appreciation for this character that I've never had before. And yeah,
that's fair.
I didn't expect that to happen at all, because in all honesty, this has been at the bottom of my Marvel list forever. So I expected nothing from this film, and maybe that's what helped too, is that I came in expecting nothing, and so then when there were those surprises, it could help.
Fair. I think it's fair. My rating actually has changed, and I think primarily for the reasons I stated before, but also because again, it's not possible for it to disappoint me as much this time as it was the first time. And so I think that some of these things that you're throwing out there is good. I agree. Tom Hiddleston, I think, again, solidifies why audiences love to see him, and he's having a great time with the role. So that is a strong performance. But the thing that we've really been remiss about is the Darcy Lewis factor. Did you like her character more than Thor, as much as in Thor, or less than in Thor?
I still like her in this movie. I think she is. I think one of the things that I noticed in this movie is they utilize her just enough. They don't give her too much to do, and they don't give her too little to do. She worked well enough for me. I know you don't like the meow meow joke, but
no, really don't,
and
really don't.
But I still really enjoy her in this movie, and so yeah, I'm gonna say Darcy Lewis gets 2 thumbs up for me in this film.
Kat Dennings does exactly what she is supposed to do, and she is being the comic relief, and she is an incredibly gifted actress, and I like the way she does what she does. Did not care what they did with the character, especially the intern bit, which was funny for about a minute, and then got awful by the end, and absolutely cringy.
Sure.
The way it rounded out. I
can
really
understand that 100%.
And so Darcy carries the burden of the intern with her. Had they freed her from the intern burden, I would have liked Darcy more in this movie.
Right.
Because again, I like Kat Dennings as a comedic actress.
Right.
I think she's got a gift. I like watching her on screen. But that intern thing, almost offensively bad.
Yeah. I can't really fault you for that, and because I do think the intern bit was just a little bit much.
Yes.
So
yes, it was.
What's weird is that it's not needed. I'm not really sure why they added there. I don't know if that was one of those points where they were just like, oh, we want to like throw something else in here that you can do, and it's not needed. So
honestly, I think it's because they felt like they needed to give Darcy somebody to have dialogue with in the action moments.
Yeah, because Jade isn't there so much.
Yeah, but I don't. You could have easily resolved that with by just having her interact with Skarsgård's character Eric.
Sure.
Just have them interact more.
Yeah. Well,
Problem
and this is a point too, and this is another place I think that we're talking about side characters there with Darcy. This is another place where we don't really give any weight to Thor's friends,
Yeah, true.
I think it's disappointing that, character like Sif or any of the others doesn't really have enough to do in the movie. And so kind of frustrating. And it almost feels like you could maybe just have Sif and forget the rest, honestly.
Yes. I agree. So I got to know, you responded better to something. Well, what are you rating it, and where is it in the ranking?
Well, to go with the rating first, this moved up from, I think, I'm trying to remember what it was on Letterboxd when I went back. I think it might have been a 2. But this moved up from a 2 to a 2.5. Because I do think that this is half a good movie. It's half a good movie, which is what a 2.5 is, right? Out of 5. There's half what you want in a film here, and the other half is just like, if they'd just gotten that half right, it could have been great. But it's not. And for all the reasons that we talked about. And so, whereas, I responded better to it, which was awesome. It's still only half a good movie.
If that. So where's it in your ranking?
Well,
or do we want me to rate
first?
it? And then...
I got to hear what your rating is. So
now, see, it would be easy to make too much hay of this, but looking back, I gave this a 1 star the first time I saw it
because nobody died.
No, half star is if you didn't accidentally.
That's where the half star,
Which honestly, I have to drop that joke given a certain production's recent troubles. That joke is going to be retired out of respect for.
It's understandable.
For a while.
I appreciate that.
The joke's gonna be retired for a while because people are gonna think I'm making fun of that, and that is not the case. That joke is 10 years old at this point. I'm not.
It is. If you'd listen to Words with Nerds, you'd know.
Yeah. This is it's an old joke, but nobody's gonna know that. So there you go. So there's the one. This I know it at least goes up to a 1.5. I'm feeling kind. I'm feeling extremely kind. So I'm going to give it a 2 because I do agree with you that even though I think they overcompensated, Thor is a more fleshed out character here. I think that the sets, I think that the visual work is stronger. It feels like a more substantive set of places that I'm in. I think that the blending of the stuff in London with the ships was like the visual effects were really well done in certain scenes here. And so I have to give credit for that, for just technical craft. And I do. I think the score is great. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move it up to a 2. But I assure you that is the absolute ceiling for this. I'm giving it a 2 to be generous and kind, for I'm a benevolent podcaster and will therefore give it a 2.
Well, okay, so with that being the case, then, where does it fall then in the rankings?
Now, we did revisit my rankings so that I could remember them this time, because this is going to get to be really difficult for me because I cannot remember week to week most of the time. So we have Iron Man 3 still at the top, followed by Iron Man, Captain America, the First Avenger, The Incredible Hulk, Avengers, Thor, the Dark World, and then bringing up dead last, dragging its rotten carcass behind everybody else.
You're whipping, boy.
Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2.
I love it. That's fantastic. So for me, it's Iron Man, and then it's Iron Man 3,
yes.
And then it's Captain America, the First Avenger, then The Incredible Hulk, The Avengers, Iron Man 2.
No.
You know what? Actually, I'm going to revise this. This. Thor, the Dark World.
Oh, I don't know how I feel about that.
Iron Man 2, and then Thor.
It's so fascinating how similar we are in that first chunk.
Yep.
And then at the end is where we quibble.
And I
Isn't
just
that bizarre?
realized this, but the thing was, and the thing where I was thinking in my head, okay, so like, what would I do? And I just realized, though, that even though I gave Iron Man 2, I think, a 3, I would actually rewatch Thor: The Dark World before Iron Man 2 because the thematic elements and the growth for the character of Thor is better than Iron Man 2. And so that's where that came in.
I would also say, and this is, again, to hit the point on Iron Man 2 that we both talked about, the photography was strangely incongruous with the first Iron Man in Iron Man 2. Remember, and the editing was all off. It was like, what is going on here? And the photography in this is just fine and works.
No, it's great.
And so it's like that edges
if
it
I
out
remember
alone.
correctly, Alan Taylor had brought over somebody he worked with on Game of Thrones, so they were definitely working with the kind of the lighting that you would get on that show, and so it's just fascinating to me that this movie has gone up in any kind of estimation. I never thought that it would hit, it would. I figured this movie would always stay at rock bottom, but it's not. So which is fascinating, and I do actually have a new rock bottom on my Letterboxd. So
now, see, I know you do. But what's really interesting is I'm going to keep beating on Iron Man 2. And I think what would be fun for all of the listeners to go along with is try to project out. Okay. And it's only through the end, only through Endgame. Try to project out and share with us your guesses as to what is going to slide under Iron Man 2 before this is all over. I really want people to guess. So in the idea of the secret ballot, Matt, we should probably tell them where we can be reached online, right?
Yeah, of course. If you want to find me, look for Matt Rushing 02. So on Twitter or Instagram or Letterboxd, that's where you find me. You can also find me here on the network, of course, in the entire 602 Club side of the network, where you find Assembling Avengers as well as Snyder Cuts, and of course the main show, the 602 Club, where we talk about all of the fandoms we love. Of course, on TFM, I'm also doing Literary Treks, The Orb, and Warp 5. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, do 2 shows over there, and one's finished. It was called Owl Post. No, it's still called Owl Post, but it was about Harry Potter, and we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time over there, Drea Kaufman and I. That's a super fun show, especially if you're into that series. And last but not least, of course, the illustrious John Mills and I talk about Star Wars each and every week over on Aggressive Negotiations, and it is a little slice of Star Wars heaven, so we hope you will check it out. But John... Yeah. If anybody does want to catch up with you and try and predict what's going to slide under Iron Man 2 for you, where can they find you?
Well, gosh, you can find me, like you said, co-hosting with you Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast, over on the Nerd Party. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party co-hosting a show called House Lights with Tristan Riddell and Darren Moser, where we look at the works of directors, whether by decade, specific combinations, whole career, if the career is manageable, sort of thing. So that's a lot of fun, though. And you can find me as Kessel Junkie on your social network of choice, KESSELJUNKIE, where I alienate people on Twitter and delight the masses with my pithy movie reviews over on Letterboxd. So that's where you can find me.
Well, as always, thank you so much for joining us here on Assembling Avengers.
Avengers!